In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make a gelatin cube in Blender. So first thing we're going to do is just talk about controls a little bit. So to move in and out, you hold the Command key and the middle mouse button. That is actually going to move your position. If you scroll, that is zooming. And right now we are viewing from this kind of like a director view. And this symbol right here indicates the camera. If you want to slide your view over, if you hold Shift and middle mouse button, then you can kind of move around that way. And again, middle mouse button holding nothing is going to be how you can orbit. This is what's called the default cube. We're just going to leave it there and talk about the tools real quickly. Here's your move tool. That's how you can move objects, how you can rotate them, and how you can scale them. And we'll be using all of those tools for this tutorial. First thing we're going to do is we're going to come up here and choose Add, and we're going to add a mesh, a plane. And you can see the plane is right here. It's inside the cube. And then it shows here over in the collections that there's a camera, a cube, a light, and a plane. So we're going to take that plane and we're going to scale it up. And we can just click here in the middle and drag. And we're going to scale it up. And we're done scaling. Now we're going to take this cube, get the move tool, and we're going to move it up. And I moved the wrong thing. I moved the plane. So grab that cube, pull it up. And now we've moved it up. And I'm just going to orbit a little bit so you can see that. This little symbol here is the light. You can see that when I clicked it, the light is selected. So I'm going to click that cube again. So I have done some scaling of the plane. I have done some moving. Next I'm going to rotate. I'm going to take this cube and just rotate it a little bit by using this rotate tool. So something like that would be fine. Because when it falls, I want it to kind of bounce around and jiggle a little bit more. So that's how we can use the rotate tool. Next thing we want to do is add some physics to this. So I'm going to go to the physics button right here, click this, and I'm going to turn this into what's called a soft body. And then the first thing I'll do once applying that is uncheck this thing that says goal. Now if I hit the space bar or play, you'll see that it falls, but it falls straight through that plane. Doesn't interact with it, it just falls through it. Because gravity is working on it, but it is not told to interact with this plane at all. So I'm going to select the plane, and I'm not going to make it a soft body, but a rigid body. Now, if I hit play, you'll notice that both the cube and the plane fall. That's not what I want to happen. That's because by default, a rigid body is set to active. I don't want it active, I want it passive. So I'll hit play one more time, and you see the cube falls, but it falls through the plane. That's because I haven't told it that this plane is also going to be a collider. So I'm going to turn on collision. And now if I hit play, it'll fall and kind of squish onto itself. It's collapsing under its own weight. I'll click that cube. Now there are some things that we can do to this to make it a little bit more rigid. What we can do is adjust this bending. So if I punch in a number like 7, you can try that and drop it, and then it kind of bounces around. You see it jiggles a little bit, but still quite rigid, because although I've increased this bending number, it is only bending along those lines, on these edges and with those vertices. So if we had more surfaces, then it would jiggle a little bit more. So we're going to go ahead, pause that, go to the beginning of time, and we're going to make some changes to this cube. So I'm going to go from object mode to edit mode. And in edit mode, I'm going to right click the cube, and I'm going to tell it to subdivide. So you can see it added more surfaces to that, so we have more faces. I'm going to right click and choose subdivide one more time, and that should be a good amount. Now I wouldn't be able to do any playing or anything like that. It's not going to work right now because I'm in edit mode. I'm going to move out of edit mode into object mode. And now if I hit play, you'll notice it kind of squishes around a little bit more. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take that bending number down a little bit more. I'll jump to the beginning of time, And maybe I'll make that a 3 and take a look at that. But you'll notice it has this very low poly look. Doesn't look very smooth. But we can make some changes to that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add something called a modifier. I'm going to add a subdivision surface. It has this modifier of soft body, but what I'm going to do is click this wrench, and then here where it says add modifier, I'm going to select subdivision surface. Now you'll notice that it has rounded edges, but still looks a little bit blocky. But let's take a look at that. There, it squishes a little bit more and looks smooth, or smoother, but not perfect. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to smooth shade this. So I'm going to right click it and tell it to smooth shade. And now that looks much better. All right, that's how we can get that look set. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to get rid of this light right here. So I'm going to select that, or we can select it up here in the collection and delete it. Hit the X key if you're on a Mac, or delete key on Windows. But now we want to see what this would look like if it were actually rendered. So we have no light in there. So let's just take a look. We can render image. And then you'll notice that it'll take a moment to render, and it's just a dark world because we don't have a light in there. We are going to add a light, but a different type of light. We're going to add another object and make that emit light. So I'm going to come up here, click Add, Mesh, Plane. And I'm going to move that plane up. And then I'm going to scale that plane along one axis. I'm going to punch out just by middle mouse, zooming out. And I'll move it up a little bit higher. We're going to make this into a light that's kind of like a fluorescent light. So that's what it looks like. Now if I render it, I'm not going to see that. It still will be a dark world, but I'm going to add a surface to this, a texture, material. So I come over here, click this, and right now there are no materials added to it, so I'm going to click New, and it's going to add a new material to that selected object. I'm not going to worry about this base color or anything like that. I'm just going to scroll down till I find the place where it says emission, and right now it says that it's emitting black. But if I click that, and then I take that emission color and I drag it up, then it's going to be emitting white. And I can adjust the emission settings here. Now I'm not going to keep going to this render button. I'm going to turn on this preview here, this viewport shading, and it's going to use whatever the viewport shading is. It's not looking great right now. That's because my render engine currently is set to the default one, and that's called Eevee. Eevee is good for some things. It's a very fast renderer, but we're going to switch it to cycles. And now we're seeing that effect a bit more. Now this is going to react as a real light. You notice as I bring it closer, it gets brighter, but also it gets softer. And if I bring it up higher, it gets dimmer, but also harder, just like a regular light would react in the real world. So I'll put my light there. And we're again previewing that cycles with this little button here. Next thing I'm going to do is change this. So I'm going to add a material. So I click the materials here. I'm going to change that base color to maybe something like this red here. It's a nice gelatin color. Then I'm going to scroll down because I want this to be somewhat transparent. I'm going to come down to the place where it says transmission. I want it to actually transmit light. So if I drag that transmission up, you'll notice that we can actually see through it. And this light, you'll notice, is also causing this red cast to it. It does look a little bit rough. Now you'll notice it looks kind of pixely because it's rendering in this viewport. It's not the final one. Also, there is some noise that comes from the rendering that can be changed in settings here, but that does cause it to render a little bit longer. So I'm going to get rid of that roughness. I'm going to take that roughness right here, and I'm going to turn that down. As I turn that down, then you're going to notice that it has a shinier look. And then we'll go ahead and take a look at that. And that might work for this. Now I want to actually view it from the way the camera would see it. So I can click this, and now this is what the camera is seeing. If I want to adjust the camera, I find it easiest to come over here, this little arrow here, click that, and go to View, and then I can say Camera to View. And now I'm actually controlling the camera, so I can move in and out, or I can zoom. I can also middle mouse button orbit, or shift middle mouse button, and kind of set that the way I want. I'm going to take this and I'm going to scale it up a bit more so I don't see it in the edges there. And that's kind of the basics to it, though I still have this kind of grayness in the sky. If I wanted to, I could make that sky all black, so I can change that world. Right now the sky color is this gray. I'm going to click that, and I'll make it a little bit more dramatic by making it black. And if I feel like my emission light is too dim, I can just go ahead and select that. Come over to my settings here, and then I can change that emission strength. Now there are other types of lights that you can add as well. And you can find them here: point, sun, spot, and area. This one that I made with this plane, this emission plane, very much like an area light, but it's emitting in all directions. And that's how you can make a falling gelatin cube in Blender. Okay, so let's just talk about the render settings. So over here in this thing that looks like a little camera, I'm currently using the cycles render, and this is the viewport render, so that's why it looks like this. It is doing a maximum number of samples of 1024. But here are the ones that count when we are doing an output. It is using a number of samples of 4096 for the final output. And then it does this thing called denoise. You can check that on or off. You can kind of see it looks a little bit speckly right now because the viewport is not denoising. But I'm going to go ahead and choose render just a single image. I'll choose render image, and you're going to see how long this would take at 4096. You can notice that that noisiness goes away over time as it does sample after sample. But currently we are at 17 or 18 samples, and you can see how long it's taking. It's going to take quite long to do 4096 samples. I think we could probably get away with as little as 12, but I think I'll probably do 40 samples per image. So I'm going to go ahead and stop that render. And instead of 4096, I'm just going to punch in 40. And I will let it do a denoise later. So those are basic render settings. There's a lot more in here you can get to later. Then you go to this setting here for output. Looks like a little printer. Here is the resolution, 1920 by 1080. So this is HD, frame rate of 24 frames per second, and start and end frames. Then I want to make sure that I set my location. So I'm going to check this, and I'm going to the desktop, and I'm just going to go ahead and accept that. And then here are the different output file formats. Currently this is set as a PNG, so when I render an animation, it'll render it frame by frame and saved as individual images. That is really the best way to do this, although the turnaround for it, if you wanted to just output a video, would be slower because you have to do some post-production on it. So I'll go over both settings. So currently it's set as a PNG and an RGB. Now if you wanted RGB with an alpha channel, that would be some sort of transparency, then you could do that as well, and then your color depth here. The only thing I'm going to do is I'm going to crank my compression to 0, and I'm going to do a PNG sequence. And then I can come up here and choose render animation. Now, because this is going to take a little while to render, I'm not going to do that right away. I'll just show you the other way to do it as a video. And then I will render the animation as a series of stills. But if you wanted to do a video, then under File Format, I would choose FFmpeg. And then I'm going to scroll down in here. And where it says Container, I'm going to change that container to an MP4. And Video Codec, I would choose the H.264. Then you can choose different settings here. That's really up to you. And then I would choose render animation. And if you do it that way, you will get a video. If you do it the other way, the series of still images, then you're going to have to do post-production. Again, I would recommend that you do it as a series of still images because you most likely want to do post-production anyway. But if you just wanted to output a video, then these would be the settings, and then you'd choose render animation, and it would render the animation. So we could just kind of see what that looks like as it goes. Currently, it's doing the first one, and then it would create a final video of it, all one file with all the frames. So you'll take a look at this. So currently we're at 13 samples, and then it'll clear up a little bit after it hits 40, and then it'll jump to the next frame. And then it's jumping to the next one. But because I don't want to output that final video, instead I want to do the series of still images, I'm going to go ahead and cancel this render. And I'm going to go back over here, and I'm going to set it back to that PNG, and I'm going to just check my settings here. PNG, no compression. And it is set to that folder there. And then I'm going to go ahead and choose render animation. And this is going to take a while. All right, it has finished rendering. Let's take a look at that. And here's my folder with my images. Here's the first image, and then you can see it there. And it actually looks pretty good for just doing 40 samples plus a denoise. Now I'm going to show you how to bring this into Adobe Premiere. So in Adobe Premiere, I'm going to start a new project. I'll call this Blender Cube. And then, so you name it what you want to name it and where you want to put it. I'm going to skip all of this stuff in the middle, and I'm just going to click Create. Then right over here, I can double click to import media, or I can go to File, Import, or I can do Command-I. If you're on Windows, you can do Control-I, or I could also use the Import section here. But I'd like to just double click right here in my project bin. And I'll select my first one, and then I'm going to click Options. And then I'm going to select Image Sequence. You do not want to select all of the images, otherwise Adobe would be bringing them in as individual frames. But if you select the first image and choose Image Sequence, then it will create a sequence of video with all of those frames. Then I'm going to click Import. And right now, this is it. It says this is a PNG sequence, and it is 8 seconds and 10 frames. But it also says, as I hover over this, that it has a frame rate of 29.97. So I want to make sure that this has the right frame rate. So before I bring it into the sequence, I'm going to right-click it, and I'm going to choose Modify, Interpret Footage. And then I'm going to tell it to assume this frame rate. And the frame rate that I had done my project was 24 frames per second. So I click OK, and now you'll notice it is 10 seconds and 10 frames because it was 250 frames. So now I can bring this over here, but that is how you can bring your PNG sequence from Blender into Adobe Premiere. And then you can edit it how you would edit any other piece of video. And then when you're ready, you can export it. So I'll just show a quick export. So if I come up here and choose Export, and then here are my settings. It's telling me what I want to call this, where I want to put it. Right now it's set at this match source high adaptive, or adaptive high bitrate, and then H.264. You can change this however you see fit. I'm going to go under Video and kind of expand this stuff so you can see. And so instead of this, I'm going to choose high quality 1080 HD, and then I'm going to click More, and I'll tell it to render at maximum depth, use the maximum render quality. I'm going to scroll down, and in here, instead of doing a VBR1 pass, I'll do a VBR2 pass, and I'll get a bit of a higher quality out of that. And then I can click Export, and it'll export that, and that will be a shareable video.